Oops. Yeah, here's Natasha. May the sacred presence of him who said he would abide in his teaching be our guide. May we follow his glorious example and tread with unfaltering step this noble path until we too shall attain enlightenment. All Buddhas throughout space and time, all honored ones, bodhisattvas, mahasattvas, wisdom beyond wisdom, maha prajna paramita. So welcome to class 3. I'm just going to make a short introduction and turn it over to Kemyo and Jo-Rin. So class 3 is when we are going to start diving into the 10 grave precepts. And I'm hoping that some of you took on the challenge of engaging us completely with the first two of the 10 grave, which is around not killing and cultivating life and not stealing. And I'm going to turn it over to Kemyo pretty soon here. I also wanted to call your attention to what I put in the chat, which is if any of you are interested or thinking about taking the precepts this year, please set up a meeting with me to talk about that. Even if you don't think you want to do it this year, but you just want to have more of a conversation about what that is because you're thinking about it maybe at some point, or what, just more. So just please feel free to send me an email and we can find a Zoom time to do that. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kemyo, who's going to lead discussion and share some thoughts and commentary about the. And thanks so much to both Kemyo and Jo-Rin for stepping forward and.
I just want to start by saying this is the very first time I've ever done any sort of Dharma presentation, so I'm very nervous. Yeah. And appreciative of now everyone who I've ever heard who's offered something before. Now I get it differently, I guess. So Shantai invited me to talk about the first grave precept, which I'll start by reading the Dharma Rain translation. Do not kill, cultivate and encourage life. In the realm of the everlasting Dharma, holding no thought of killing is the precept of not killing. The life of Buddha increases with life. No life can be cut off. Continue the life of Buddha. Do not kill Buddha. And I want to revisit what Shantai said last week, which is that in the commentary after the precepts, it's kind of a two-part commentary. So the first part, in the realm of the everlasting Dharma, that's Bodhidharma who's pointing us toward the absolute, in this case, the everlasting Dharma. And then the second part of it, the life of Buddha increases with life, no life can be cut off. That's commentary by Dogen, who is offering us or guiding us more towards how we're integrating the absolute into our everyday life. So how are we integrating the absolute and the relative? And for this for all the precepts, but just looking at this precept, it's that integration piece, holding the view of the absolute while living fully present in the relative in my daily life. Which I have found most impactful when I think about my practice with this precept. And there's another translation I wanted to read. This is from the Zen Peacemaker Order, which was started by Roshi Bernie Glassman, who's in my Zumi's lineage. And they offer this version of this precept: being mindful of the interdependence of oneness and diversity, and wishing to actualize my vows, I engage in the spiritual practice of, and then in this case, cultivating and encouraging life. So I like that introduction to the precepts because the Zen peacemakers have this piece that feels so alive for me in my practice, which is how do I actualize my vows by holding this view of the absolute in whatever I'm doing at any given moment. So in the precepts, there's this prohibition, and then there's the affirmation of something. And in this precept, the prohibition is not to kill, and the harmonizing teaching is to recognize that I am not separate from everything that is. And that is kind of my focus for what I wanted to present about this precept, is how this precept helps us realize non-separation. And so I'll talk about this in two different ways. One is this first part, the prohibitory part, which we can talk in the discussion about like the literal do not kill. Like I was saying to Shintai, the first time that this precept became alive for me, my house was infested by ants, and I was really, and then I had like a precepts class and I was wrestling with killing the ants. So there's that aspect of this, the literal killing, and what felt more vibrant for me in this round of looking at it was the mind of killing. So what does the mind of killing look like in my practice? And so this book, which I think Shintai talked about last week, it's called Waking Up to What You Do by Diane Eschen Rossetto, and she's with the San Francisco lineage. Also Soto Zen. She talks about this, she emphasizes this precept as cultivating an awareness of mind states. So in this, practicing this precept, I'm cultivating an awareness of the mind state of killing. And she emphasizes mind states over specific behaviors. And this is how she writes about it. The idea here is not to cease taking any life at all, but to face squarely our intentions. And she's using the word intentions in a synonymous way to mind states. To face squarely our intentions and allow ourselves to make sensible choices for each and every situation. In this way, we learn how to support and embrace all life. To take up the way of supporting life is to do the best we can to be open to and to preserve life wherever possible, and to be clear and present in times when we cannot. And this next part is the part that was helpful to me. And this was the first precepts book I ever read. And it was an awesome introduction. She frames it slightly differently than we do here at Wy'East, but it was a cool way in for me. So she writes, I take this precept not as an injunction to never kill, but as a directive to become more directly aware and present to the unquestionable life force in all things, and why we intentionally or unintentionally ignore this life force or interrupt it. And so so for me, what practicing this precept looks like is to investigate my intentions through mindfulness practice, to notice first when I am manifesting the mind of killing. And specifically for me, what the mind of killing looks like is fear or rage, rejection, rejection of a person, rejection of a circumstance, scorn, sarcasm, emotions and behaviors which concretize my sense of a separate self and reflect my karmic habits. So that's kind of one side of this, and the other side is the mind of cultivating life. So stepping away from the mind of killing and shifting toward the mind of cultivating life. Rossetto talks about this first grave precept as a directive to be more aware and present to the life force in all things. And so the mind state of cultivating and encouraging life of Buddha is a view that we choose, but it's also a manifestation of our Buddha nature. So practicing these precepts, and this one in particular, is a practice of returning over and over and over, because I forget all the time, to the Dharma of non-separation and emptiness. And with continual practice comes increased access, deeper access to my wholesome awareness of non-separation, which feels like Buddha nature to me when I'm in that place where I have that direct contact with non-separation. And there's another Soto Zen teacher from the same lineage, the San Francisco lineage, who just writes about this life force in the most stunningly eloquent way. So I'll quote from her as well. This is the book. Her name is Catherine Thanos, and she has passed. So this was actually a collection, a post-posthumous collection that was put together by her students. So this is how she describes the life force in all things. We co-create our lives with others. When we understand our life as an interconnected, codependent flow of energy, we realize that we exist in collaboration with the universe, rather than as a separate self, interacting with an independent other. We are an energy field interacting with multiple other energy fields, and how we interact internally and externally determines the shape and possibilities of our world. Now, so I gotta find my glasses, it's dark. So what I love about Thanos's description is, to me, that's a very accessible metaphor of energy fields. You know, and this is part of why I've loved coming to Wy'East for the last year and a half, is I have access to my Buddha nature when this energy field is in this energy field. I feel it quite acutely, actually, most of the time that I'm here, which keeps me coming back. And I'll end with just like a personal example. Yes, okay, I'm good on time. You know, my kids are teenagers, and this whole shelter-in-place thing, and the disruption, and the protests, and the politics, and all that, it's definitely starting to weigh on all of us, and it's definitely starting to weigh on them. And I had a conversation with one of them Sunday night, I think it was, and they're just really suffering. They're really struggling. And this current context is exacerbating things that they would have been struggling with anyway, but it is exacerbating it. And I listened and I listened, and I said a few things, but it didn't feel, I went to bed that night and I felt so inadequate. I felt so incredibly inadequate as a mother. And like, I know that's not true, but God, I really felt it deeply. And the medicine in that moment was practicing this precept, because for me, it was a gateway into a direct experience of non-separation. Like, if I am not separate from my kids, it's not my well-being, it's not their well-being, it's our well-being. And in that moment, you know, as I'm laying in bed trying to go to sleep, it expanded from my kids to other people in my life, to people in my neighborhood. So then it's just the whole world. And I don't know if you guys could see the title of Thanos's book, but it's called The Truth of This Life, Zen Teachings on Loving the World as It Is. And when I'm practicing this precept and I'm having a direct visceral experience of non-separation, it's like there's no directive to cultivate or encourage life, because I am alive and you're alive and we're alive. So that very truth, what is there not to love? That's kind of what I'm left with. And what's been coming up for me with the precept study is, well, Jesus, if we're all not separate, why wouldn't we practice the precepts? Like, why wouldn't that, like, all of a sudden it doesn't make sense to use sarcasm or reject someone. It just doesn't make sense. So I don't feel that way all the time, but sometimes I do. And I will close with that and open it up for discussion. I have discussion questions or if people just want to jump in. Thank you.
Yeah, we have about, I don't know, 5 to 7 minutes, not that long before we'll switch gears. But I know Kemyo has some ideas about possible discussion questions for this, but you're also invited to share how keeping this practice was, keeping this precept was over the past week. So that's okay too, just what people's experience are, or questions or grappling or whatever. You're all invited.
I just wanted to say, Kimyo, I thought that was, for me, it hit me really solidly. It was really, really great. That you did an excellent job. But I had, it seems so common sense when you said it, but not killing. If we believe we're connected, then why would we want to kill part of what we're connected to? But it sounds like, duh, but I hadn't looked at it that way until you said that. It's like profound. And the way you described it, it just really sunk in for me. So I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. That was very helpful for me.
I thought you put it very beautifully as well. Mom and I both liked the bit about energy fields. That was a really insightful thing to share.
Yeah.
I think what stood out for me is that it seems like every year when we come across this precept, the part that always jumps out is the do not kill. It seems like it was almost like that wasn't even part of the discussion. It was so focused on the positive and connecting and just Sangha with the world. And so I really appreciate that perspective, that focus, because I think that, at least for me, when I hit this precept every time, it's, I think I lean towards the other side, the do not kill, don't kill somebody's spirit or the ants or the mice or whatever. And so I really appreciate your perspective tonight. Thank you.
I can respond to that briefly. The delusion part, though, the mind of killing is important, because for me, that's the gateway into the realization of non-separation. Had I not been so mired in a feeling of inadequacy about being a mother, I don't know that I would have really practiced in that moment. And so somewhere in one of the wisdom sutras, I think it talks about, there's no realization without delusion. There's no delusion without realization. Like they're both necessary.
I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions or comments before we shift gears.
I have a question in terms of, for instance, does getting angry at someone, is that a form of, quote, killing? I don't know, just a question. Is that a mindset of because there's a non-connection there?
Can I answer?
Sure.
So I think that the direction here is to bring a mindful awareness to whatever is arising internally.
Right.
And investigate. But to investigate with compassion and curiosity and see what's here now. And by seeing clearly, there's the possibility, there's the potential for acting skillfully, for acting in a way that does cultivate and encourage life, your own as well as somebody else's. So anger is what's here, joy is what's
Right.
here, fear is what's here, inadequacy is what's here. Investigate.
Okay.
And that's the gateway into an experience of non-separation.
Thank you.
I think I'll jump in here. And one comment on just this last little your question, Lexi. That question points us to also that the 10 grave precepts have a way of overlapping, and it's often said if you unravel one or practice one completely, you practice them all. So it kind of points us to sort of how they're interwoven, and I always think of like Venn diagrams, and also that the 3 pure precepts are the sort of umbrella, and the 10 grave precepts that we're getting into now are these descriptors of how do we keep cease from evil, do only good, do good for others. So your question's great, because that's how we kind of engage it and grapple with it. It's like, is that the same? How does it overlap? Is my anchor cutting off, killing? Is it, or is it not? Depends, you know? So I think that points to how it is that we actually really do engage these and work with them. So thank you for that. And Kemyo, thank you so much for getting us started on this. Much appreciated. So now we're going to shift gears and turn it over to Joe Rin, who's going to lead us in discussion on the second of the Grave Precepts.
All right, can everyone hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. First of all, I just want to say great job, Kemyo. That was really, thank you for sharing such a personal piece of your practice, and it was I really enjoyed listening to you. This portion of the discussion is going to be addressing the second of the 10 grave precepts, which is do not steal, honor the gift not yet given. And I'd like to begin by reading the entire translation that we use in our lineage. Do not steal, honor the gift not yet given. In the realm of the unattainable Dharma, holding no thought of gain is the precept of not stealing. The self and the things of the world are just as they are. The mind and its object are one. The gateway to enlightenment stands open wide. So a word about the commentaries on the precepts. I'd like to read a passage written by Kyogen Carlson on this very subject. Kyogen wrote, phrases, particularly from the commentary, will start to arise during the day. It isn't necessary to recognize how they apply or what they mean. It's enough to just keep watching it happen and to allow an understanding to emerge from a place deeper than our habitual way of interpreting things. So from that statement, and I think we're well aware that our habitual mental patterns of attempting to process the precepts through interpretation are very strong. And I try to hold them lightly and come from a perspective of watching and observing my reactions as the precepts arise. And every time they do, we have an opportunity to watch for patterns or contractions, clenching, or smiling, or any body reactions as we move with the precepts. So with that in mind, let's unpack the commentaries on this second precepts. And like Kemyo said, Bodhidharma's perspective is coming from the absolute. And Bodhidharma's commentary on the second precept is in the realm of the unattainable Dharma. Holding no thought of gain is the precept of not stealing. So Bodhidharma's comment here is pointing towards our original state. So beyond concepts of, any concepts of loss and gain, and how could anything be lacking? And Dogen's comment is the self and the things of the world are just as they are. The mind and its object are one. The gateway to enlightenment stands open wide. The Dogen's portion here shares how when we seek nothing, we hold the whole universe in open hands. And in original mind, everything is complete. To grasping at this or that, we lose touch with that completeness. So if you'll hold that second precept in mind, I'd like to read another translation with the commentaries and just let this translation soak in to help maybe create a more complete picture of where this precept may be pointing towards. This translation is from the Village Zendo. It's a second grave precept, not stealing. Self-nature is subtle and mysterious. In the realm of the unattainable Dharma, not having thoughts of gaining is called the precept of not stealing. The self and things of the world are just as they are. The gate of emancipation is open. Being satisfied with what I have, this is the precept of non-stealing. So as my practice evolves, it often seems that the focus has shifted away from the surface aspects of the grave precepts. I've been spending more time with the more subtle facets of the precepts. Well, it seems that way. But with that being said, last week during our building evacuation to Seaside and working through exhaustion, both mental and physical, I noticed that the defenses, they lighten a little bit. Because it takes a lot of energy for the small mind to prop up and strengthen the ego. And the precept of not stealing and its surface meaning arose many times during this last week. And I'll give you an example. My eating habits during the day are often neglected. And walking by the kitchen there at Seaside, it's like, well, there's some food left out right there at the kitchen. I think I'll just grab this snack. And true, the food was there for the taking. Or was it? But with the second precept in mind, I try to move more carefully, consider my actions, move a little bit slower, move skillfully. So it was satisfying to realize that this, like Kimyo said, this precept is alive. And it arises to help guide actions in real time. And when it's noticed, it's very comforting. They're always present. And carrying the precepts through my daily actions, it's interesting to see how the different sides of the precepts consistently arise simultaneously, or sometimes one directly follows the other. And I've also noticed that the surface meaning of a precept, it sometimes gives my ego a boost. Well, I haven't stolen anything today, so I'm holding this precept pretty carefully. I'm not breaking it. But then at the same time, arising are questions of who has the desire to steal? Who is grasping? Who or what are we trying to protect here? And I'd like to dive a little deeper into the more subtle facet of the precept. And coming from this perspective, Josho Pat Phelan from Chapel Hill Zen Center in North Carolina, she writes, the state of mind of wanting something that we think we don't already have, is characterized by grasping. Seeing the world as if it were separate from ourselves is the view that propels us into wanting and taking. The state of non-stealing, or not having a thought of attainment, is characterized by contentment. And one way to practice with this precept is to look at your state of mind. Do you find an underlying quality of dissatisfaction and wanting, or is it characterized by contentment? In either case, just look at the source of it. And this statement encourages us to let the precepts percolate within our practice each moment as we move through life. Consider what the finger is pointing towards. And thank you for letting me share some from the personal side of my practice. And I also have some discussion questions, or if anyone has any questions, feel free.
I don't know that I think you kind of touched on it, but honor the gift not yet given. I find that particularly interesting in that precept because when you have things around the house that are, if you have a husband, as I do, or a wife, you find you have a lot of communal property, stuff that isn't yours or theirs, but is ours. And you often just use it without thinking about it. But if you stop and ask, there's a very great sense of, it gives them a great sense of ease, ownership, and I don't know what else to call it, but if you ask first, it really benefits them. And I think that's one of the things about this precept that I like the most, is that bit about the honor the gift not yet given. That by not taking without asking, if you ask first, you're allowing the other person to give it to you.
I agree with you. Thank you. The outline, we were constrained by time, so I had a lot of ideas, and I love that part of the precept too. Honor the gift not yet given. And when you're, like you said, when you have that object that may be communal property, but when you're asking, it's that precept is in your mind. Or whether we know it directly or not, it's subtle, but it's there. That's the one thing I noticed. They're always present, whether we notice them or not. Has the second precept come up for anyone else recently, or how have you been working with it?
I'll share a little in that I found that I was working with it this week on kind of more of a concrete, literal level, and working from home. It is, the boundaries between personal time and work time get a little murky, and it's very interesting about really staying true to my work commitments when we're offered some flexibility. So like last week, because of the smoke, I wasn't feeling well, and I was realizing that if I just stared at my computer for the remaining 3 hours of my day, that I didn't feel good. No one would really know. But I put in and because I was working, actually I think because of this precept, I didn't try to just kind of power through it. I thought, I'm just going to put in for the sick time and let them know that I'm actually just not well. And it felt better. And it was this dilemma, because it's like, it's going to call attention to the fact that I'm calling in sick, but yet it felt cleaner. And I feel like that just reminds me, like, you just sleep better when you keep the precepts. I didn't have that like, did I have or didn't I have? So anyway, but more just kind of a mundane example, but it comes up a lot, all these things.
I have
I noticed. Go ahead, Lonnie.
You were right, Lonnie.
I was just going to say, you were kind of making me think I have a very similar experience during this work at home period, because it's super easy to, you just, I don't know, go for a walk during the day, or, just do things during the day and that are not work related, because nobody's going to never, ever know. But I do feel this precept kind of bubbling up, and I, just if I have things that I'm going to do, I've been taking vacation time because it just feels like the right thing to do, like I feel like I'm stealing if I'm not, so.
Dixie, I'm glad you brought up the honor the gift not yet given, because I think about that. I try really hard when I give a gift or I do something, for somebody or some purpose, that, maybe I don't get thanks, or I don't get recognition, or maybe somebody doesn't even know that I did what I did. And I kind of think, well, maybe they didn't like what I gave them or whatever. And I think, okay, honor the gift not yet given, because you don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen when I give a gift. I give a gift. I want to give a gift because I want to give a gift without any expectation of anything in return. And I don't know how it might be returned by that gift being passed on to somebody else. Maybe the good vibes that came from giving will give that person good vibes to give to somebody else. So that's what that part means to me. So I'm really glad you brought that up, because it's like, wait, you don't know what's going to happen with what you do when you give of yourself, or you give something to somebody or some cause. But I want to trust that it's going to get passed on forward.
I'd like to bring up something, and that is the sort of the nebulous feeling of not wellness psychologically that I get living in this time we're living in. And with this talk of the precepts, what I realize is that we're watching a constant state of other people, important people, violating these precepts continuously. And no consequence for that behavior. And I'm realizing that it's sort of the continuous barrage of that is what emotionally and psychologically is driving me crazy. And what is that? How do you minimize or exclude that from your consciousness?
Well, what I thought recently, Ed, on the hard stuff, or what I call the hard stuff, I just look, it's an opportunity. The gate swing is open, and it's an opportunity to practice with it.
The other thing I would add, one, I appreciate, Ed, that you didn't use specific names of public figures that one might be thinking about in this situation. I had meant to say that at the beginning, that it's natural. I think given the climate that we're in, these things are going to naturally kind of come up in our discussion, but I'm asking people to maybe not name specific names, just as you did. So that was helpful. And noticing as we're working with the precepts, the precepts bring us into alignment with our bodhisattva nature. And so what I'm trying to get to is, like, there's a way that it brings us into harmony. So when we notice ways that we're cutting off, some of the work that we can do is looking at what precept am I breaking with this attitude, this mindset, whatever. What can I do to allow for the things of the world to be as they are, as it says in the commentary. So what can I do to open the heart of acceptance for that without forcing? I'm not suggesting forcing, but and I'm also want to acknowledge it's a tall order given the divisive times that we're in. So it's even more important than ever to kind of do our own work about how can I be with this in a really open way. I'd invite other comments on this, because it's what you pointed to, a huge challenge, I think, for all of us right now.
I think I just want to say, kind of piggybacking on that, and also to respond to Kemio's talk, I really appreciate what you said, Kemio, about I'm not sure. I guess the idea of acceptance is kind of what is bubbling up for me. It's helpful to accept sort of what's happening. I mean, not, or at least notice it and work with it. I guess that's what you're saying before. Notice it and work with it. And yeah, and I guess that's what Sean said too. I think, and that's kind of what I've been trying to do as well during this time. And yeah, it's very challenging.
And I'd also want to add, sorry, I was going to add, I want to add that accept doesn't mean passivity, doesn't mean do nothing. Sometimes.
And it doesn't mean you're condoning behavior that you're witnessing either.
Yeah, accept is a really tricky word.
Yeah, it's I don't know if it's even the right word, but it's the word that keeps kind of showing up in all of the Buddhist literature I'm reading. But yeah, it's sort of like the idea of kind of well, I guess if you want to be practical, like sort of experiencing whatever emotion arises, like anger, you know, you're feeling anger arising when you're witnessing all this stuff, but don't act on it, just, you know, feel it, and then I don't know what the next step is, because I guess it's don't practice equanimity or cultivate equanimity. That's the next step.
I think the next step is self-compassion.
It looks like we've arrived at 8:15, but I want to give Jo Wren a chance to, if there's anything else you want to say to close.
Oh no, just thanks for letting me share tonight, and Kimyo also. Thank you, Kimyo.
Can I say one thing, Shantai?
Yeah.
I just want to mention that when we do this precept practice, we're looking at our own actions, and it's easy to witness others doing their behavior and think, you know, they're not doing it right. And I'd like to ask or challenge you all to try to refrain from measuring people who aren't practicing with the precepts by the precepts that we're studying. And there's an aspect of this where us doing our practice has an effect on the world. It ripples out in a particular way, and it might not be easy to see at first. And this is where some aspect of faith comes in. But even by us doing our simple practice, our humble practice, the effects ripple out, and those effects will touch others in a way that we can't foresee. So I just want to plant that little flag for our work does do good things in the world.
So next week, we will be discussing the precept of do not misuse sexuality, remain faithful in relationships, and do not speak dishonestly, communicate truthfully, and that will be led by Teiko. So looking forward to the discussion, and encourage you to engage those 2 of the 10 grave precepts as completely as possible this week, and we'll have discussion on that next week. And please make our show. Abiding in this ephemeral world like a lotus in muddy water, the mind is pure and goes beyond. Thus we bow to Buddha. All Buddhas throughout space and time, all honored ones, bodhisattvas, mahasattvas, wisdom beyond wisdom, Maha Prajna Paramita. Well, thank you everyone for the discussion, and thanks again to Jo Wren and Kimyo for leading, and look forward to continuing next week. And feel free to unmute yourself to say good night to each other a little bit.
What do you have?